Morning, everybody. As Lenith said, I'm Carolyn Relf. I'm with the Yukon Geological Survey, and I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of critical minerals in Yukon to provide a bit of context for the presentations that you're going to see today. There's a number of Yukon companies exploring for critical minerals, and you'll get to hear a bit more detail about the specific projects, but I'll give you a broader snapshot. I thought I would start just with a few definitions. I'm sure you all know what critical and strategic metals are, but there are different uses of these terms in different jurisdictions. So for the sake of this presentation, when I talk about critical minerals, I mean minerals that are essential to the economy. Their primary uses are in renewables and high-tech applications. Some countries include defense as a use for critical minerals. They're ones that have no known substitute, and they are we have a supply of them that we can trade with our partners on. That last point distinguishes them from strategic metals, because strategic metals are ones which a country doesn't have a significant domestic supply and they don't have reliable trade partners. And then battery metals, that one's pretty self-evident. It's the suite of metals used for energy storage. One thing about these commodities, one country's critical minerals may be another country's strategic metals, depending on their geologic endowment. And the commodities under each of these categories changes with time, and that graphic across the bottom is meant to illustrate that. You can see in the 1700s, the metals that were needed for the energy technology of the day was a different suite of minerals than the 1800s and 1900s and so on. And so these lists are not static. They're going to change with time, but we can talk about what are critical minerals today. Last year in March, Canada released its first critical minerals list. The list is shown here on the left. There's 31 elements. They call them minerals as opposed to critical metals because the list does include a number of non-metallic commodities. Yukon uses Canada's critical mineral list. Some jurisdictions have created their own list. Ontario, for example, has a slightly different list, but in Yukon, we've looked at our inventory, and on Canada's list, we have 12 commodities that we actually have deposits of in the territory. And by deposits, I specifically mean drill delineated in-ground defined resources. 13 of the commodities on the list we have occurrences of. They've been discovered, but there aren't defined resources yet. And then 6 of the critical minerals on Canada's list, we don't have occurrences documented in Yukon. And for at least a couple of these, it's unlikely that any would be discovered just based on our geology. In 2020, Canada and the US signed a letter of agreement to establish a strengthened trade supply chain between the two countries to supply critical minerals. The 13 minerals on the left are Canada's a major supplier to the US of, and you can see some of the uses of those commodities. So where does Yukon fit in critical mineral space? We're not a significant player right now. We're actually a very modest supplier to Canada's supply chain. Minto Mine in Yukon produces, on average, since it opened, about 15 tons a year of copper. It's a small deposit, but a high-grade one. But its production is less than 0.1% of Canada's total average, which is about 500,000 tons. And then in the Keno district, there's a small amount of zinc and indium come out of the ground with the silver ore as byproducts, and so that also contributes to our total critical mineral contribution. But you can see that it's pretty modest, but there's potential for it to grow. The image on the left is a document called Our Clean Future. It was released by Yukon government in 2020, and it's a 10-year plan or strategic plan to it focuses on climate change, and it's looking at renewables and climate change adaptation, and it sets a number of targets for greenhouse gas emissions, including by 2030, so within a decade, a reduction by 45% of carbon emissions. But what's significant is that this doesn't include emissions from mining. They're dealing with mine emissions separately. So there's room, even within our Clean Future strategy, for growth in the mining sector in the territory. Last fall, the Yukon Geological Survey released this document. It's an inventory of critical minerals in the territory, and I've got a number of copies of it. The document's broken into 2 parts. There's a section that's a narrative that provides some definitions, gives lists for Canada and a few other countries, talks broadly about trade of these commodities. And then the bulk of the document is a series of data sheets and accompanying maps that provides some more detailed information about critical minerals. Talks about where they're found, who the major producers are, whether or not they can be recycled. And for those 12 commodities that we have deposits of in the territory, we've included some graphs showing price trends and production trends over the last 20 years. If you don't want to carry away a hard copy, there's some digital copies on memory sticks at the back of the room. So the intent of this report was initially just to pull all the information on Yukon's critical minerals into one spot so that there's references and links and data all in one place for explorers to use. But as critical minerals are gaining momentum and becoming more attractive to people, we thought it may also serve as a starting point to frame out a strategy for critical minerals if that's where Yukon government wants to take it. Morning. So I'll just show you some of the contents of the document. I'm going to touch on some of the major deposits that we have. Yukon has a total of 19 deposits of copper, and the map on the left, just to describe it, the large symbols show locations of deposits, and the smaller symbols are some of the more significant occurrences that we have. The colored polygons are clipped out of our bedrock geology map, so we're just showing those geologic units that are associated with these metals. And as I said, we've got 19 deposits. In total, they contain about 15 billion pounds of copper. That total just includes those which are 43-101 compliant. There's an additional 1,000 plus occurrences documented in our MinFile database, and copper occurs in a variety of settings in the territory. Just to walk through the top 6 largest copper deposits, Casino is the largest by a significant margin, almost 11 billion pounds of copper. You'll hear from Paul Westsalz next on the Casino project. Nickel Show is the second largest copper deposit, almost 1.5 billion pounds of copper. Minto are producing copper mine, 693 million pounds. Carmack's Copper, which is related to the Minto deposit genetically, 572 million pounds. And then there's a couple of volcanogenic deposits down in the Finlayson district, Kudzakaya and Fire Lake, and you'll hear from BMC about Kudzakaya. If we look at zinc, we've got over 25 deposits of zinc in the territory, containing a total combined 60 billion pounds of zinc and 900 plus additional occurrences documented. The predominant style of mineralization for zinc is sedimentary exhalative, and the gray unit on the map shows the distribution of shales in the Selwyn Basin that host these deposits. The largest deposit that we have is the Selwyn, 38.6 billion pounds of zinc. Mac Pass, just to the northwest, this is Fireweed's project, and you'll hear from Brandon about this shortly, 6.7 billion pounds. Kudzakaya, I mentioned, is a copper deposit, also contains significant zinc. Yukon base metal, if you're familiar with Yukon and you've been following the territory for a while, this deposit used to be called the Andrew. Blend deposit and Logan, both over 1 billion pounds of copper. And then Faro, we don't have a 43-101 compliant resource, but the historic resource, as the past producer, is 4.7 billion pounds. Nickel, platinum group metals, and cobalt have been lumped together because they typically occur in association with each other. We have one 43-101 compliant deposit of nickel, and that's the Nickel Show. It also contains copper. There's 2.6 billion pounds of nickel, 145 million pounds of cobalt, and 3.5 million ounces each of platinum and palladium. The region where Nickel Show occurs in southwestern Yukon is along an ultramafic belt that has a number of showings. Canalask is a historic resource, over 10 million pounds of nickel. And then in the Finlayson Lake district, there's a number of occurrences that also contain cobalt and or nickel. Fire Lake contains 16.7 million pounds of cobalt. Tungsten, tin, and molybdenum. We have a number of occurrences and deposits. Tungsten in particular, the Log Tongue and Mac Tongue shown here, those are large deposits. Log Tongue has 893 million pounds of tungsten and Mac Tongue 844 million pounds. These are significant because globally, China controls the vast majority of tungsten. They produce 80-some% of it, and they've bought up a lot of world resources. And so Tungsten's not just a critical mineral, but it's a strategic one as well. And these two deposits are among the world's top 10 largest. We have a couple others, 95 million pounds of tungsten at Mar and 89 million pounds at Risby. Tin deposits, there's one 43101 compliant tin deposit, and that's the Silver Range. This deposit used to be called the Keg, so if you've been following Yukon properties, that's previously known as Keg. And then molybdenum, the largest molybdenum deposit is at Casino, along with the biggest copper deposit. And Logtung has a significant resource of moly as well. So I'm not going to walk through every one of the 31 critical minerals here, but if you want to read up on them, like I said, help yourself to a copy of the volume. These two maps show on the left the distribution of known deposits with just the primary metal shown, because it gets a bit cluttered if we try and show all commodities, but as you saw, many of them are polymetallic. And then the map on the right shows drilled prospects or occurrences where there's drill data from critical minerals. So that's a snapshot of our endowment. If we look at where explorers are spending money in the territory, this graph, it's probably a bit small to see, but the gold bars represent expenditures on gold exploration over the last 20 years. And then the blue bars are zinc lead, the orange are copper, the silver is silver. The green bars are platinum group metals and nickel. And then the top two bars are, the gray is a combined other critical minerals and other commodities generally. And to me, two things jump out on this graph. First of all, you can see when devolution happened in Yukon, when the federal government transferred responsibility for managing mineral resources to the territorial government, you can see that there was a big jump in the baseline level of exploration spending in the territory. And then the second thing that jumps out is that gold by far is the most sought after commodity in Yukon in terms of exploration spending. So it doesn't really reflect a strong drive for critical minerals. But if we look forward, this is from data taken from the International Energy Agency. They gave a talk last week during National Mining Week, and I took some of their data. This graph shows international trade in energy commodities, and we typically think of energy commodities as oil, gas, and coal. They included critical minerals and hydrogen in the mix. And the two bars, the blue bar represents 2019 data, so how much money was being spent on or what proportion rather, of international trade was comprised of each of these commodities in 2019. The orange bars are projections to 2050 based on commitments made at COP26 by countries who've signed on for net zero by 2050. And this is interesting because you can see a huge shift away from what we traditionally think of as international energy trade, away from hydrocarbons, and critical minerals is the most significant trade commodity that they're anticipating. This is just a quote from his presentation. They see clean technology as the fastest growing segment of demand for minerals. And in particular, the author cited lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, and rare earth elements as commodities that are really going to see a jump in demand. So that's a forward-looking statement, I guess, for 2050. If we come a little bit closer to our current time frame and look at 2030, this is from a Society of Economic Geologists paper. And what they did is they pulled metals that are used in energy technology, and they included in that category production of energy, transmission, and storage. And then they looked at the specific use and status, whether the commodity is a primary ore or co-product or a byproduct. And the byproducts are significant because they may be in high demand, but the deposits won't be economic unless the main ore is economic. What I've done here is I've filtered their table based just on those commodities that we have deposits of in Yukon. And you can see for all except platinum group metals, they're anticipating an increase in demand by 2030. And you can see platinum group metals, their primary use is as catalytic converters, and so that explains the anticipated decrease in demand for that one. As you saw, we're well endowed with zinc as well, and zinc wasn't on this table, so I looked up in the World Bank report from last fall what they anticipate zinc prices are going to do between now and 2030, and they're anticipating a short-term decline followed by an increase to 2030. So all to say, the commodities that Yukon has deposits of in the critical mineral realm are all looking pretty positive. So having them in the ground and getting them out of the ground obviously are two different things. This map is it's from our Yukon Resource Gateway initiative. It's an initiative whereby the federal and territorial governments and industry jointly fund upgrades and new road builds in a number of regions of Yukon. I've shown the 3 operating mines here. Not sure if I can. Anyway, I hope you can see them. I can't see around the corner to point them out on the graph. But the orange star is the Minto mine, the gold star is Eagle Gold, and the white star is the silver mine, Alexco's Keno Silver. And the different colored road segments are those areas targeted under this initiative for upgrades. So if we look first of all near Carmax, the letter E on the diagram, the first step of each of these components of the initiative is to get an agreement in place with the affected First Nation. And Yukon currently has 6 agreements finalized. The first one was the Carmax bypass, where the letter E is. You can't probably see it because it's a very short segment, but it's simply a bypass around the community, so heavy truck traffic will go around the town instead of through it. And then extending beyond that, the pale blue color is called the Freegold Road, and that's had an agreement signed recently. It's going to connect to the Carmax bypass. Beyond that, and there's not an agreement in place yet, but the purple-colored road is a part rebuild and a part new build, and it's a road that will connect Casino to the main highway network. And just shown on here are several of the copper deposits along this road corridor that will have lots of opportunity for access once these road systems are in place. If we look further east, in the eastern part of the territory, there's a number of road segments, Nahanni Range Road, which will connect the Selwyn deposit, the North Canal Road, and a couple of upgrades along sections of the Robert Campbell Highway. When those are all the agreements for these are in place, and when those upgrades happen, these deposits will be within pretty close proximity to these upgraded roads. Just for reference, the blue dots are predominantly zinc deposits, and purple are tungsten, and then the combined orange-blue are copper zinc. Up near the Keno and Eagle mines, that road labeled G is the Silver Trail. It's the most recently signed agreement, and it's going to obviously benefit the 2 operating mines, and it'll provide access to Banyan's announced resources yesterday. But there are also 3 critical mineral deposits in close proximity to that road. There's a tungsten, a zinc, and a copper zinc deposit. And beyond these resource gateway upgrades, there's a number of deposits that sit in very close proximity to our Alaska Highway, which is our main transportation corridor through the territory. So if we look at power, this is our power grid. It's anchored by 3 hydro dams, supplemented with LNG and diesel generation. The red portion has a higher transmission capacity, and the blue portion is lower. I don't remember what the capacities are. But the big news on the energy front is that Yukon just signed an agreement to extend the transmission line down into northern BC to Atlin, and that'll bring another 8 megawatts of power onto the grid. So this is just intended to give a snapshot of where the government is investing in, where the government's investing in power and in and road infrastructure. I can't go back, but I think you saw the document, the map. There are a few that are off-grid or not near grid, but there's also a lot of investment going on right now in renewables. Several communities are investing in solar panels and wind power, and the Geological Survey is taking a look at geothermal potential, particularly down in the Burwash landing area near the Nickel Show deposit. This region has lots of evidence for high heat flow in that area. So just to wrap up quickly, going back to the original title, do critical minerals represent an opportunity for the territory? I would say yes, they do. We know that historically and even today that the single biggest investment area is in gold exploration, and that's expected to continue. But as we see a shift in the energy sector, and particularly looking out towards 2050, critical minerals are likely to become a much bigger portion of the energy mix. And so there's going to be an increased demand, and we're seeing predictions about that even in the next decade. Yukon and Canada are both very invested in renewables. Yukon has some aggressive targets that we hope to meet by 2030 with respect to both power production and transportation. And so this is an opportunity for us to not just benefit from the green shift, but to contribute and be part of the green shift by seeing some of our resources get out of the ground. Something of note is that many of the deposits that we have are primary ore. They're not byproduct ore that depends on the value of the main commodity. And our Clean Future strategy, although it has a target for carbon emissions, that doesn't include emissions from mines. Mining intensity targets are being developed separately, and there's going to be opportunities for industry to engage and advocate for retaining capacity to develop some of these deposits. And that's it. Thank you.